dear ones. You're listening to the What God Is Not podcast with Father Michael O'Loughlin and Mother Natalia.
Hey friends, this is Mother Natalia. Today I am recording with a good friend of mine and Father Michael's. Her name is Rachel Schmitt, formerly Rachel Sweeney. I'm sure you've heard her name on the podcast before. Father Michael's not joining us today. I'm very sorry. And Rachel and I are talking about the discernment of when to say no and when to say yes when we are asked for help. Father Michael very humbly let me share a little bit of a conversation that he and I had several months ago, even though he's not here. So we can all commend him for his humility. And it's a great discussion. I think Rachel's really amazing, and you're all going to love her just like Father Michael and I do. And if you are a hashtag banter hater, this episode is for you because we didn't really have any banter, at least not at the beginning. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to him forever.
Hello, Rachel.
Hello, Mother Natalia.
I kind of just said that the way that Father Michael says, like, hello. I just realized that.
Yeah, that was...
Man. I realize this at points that I'm, like, picking up his mannerisms, and I don't know. I feel like he's not picking up any of mine. That's kind of annoying.
Well, I think we become our parents, but our parents don't become us. So it's only fair that you would pick up his, unfortunately or fortunately. I think it depends on the ones.
Good point. So Rachel and I are recording in person, which is very exciting. It's also very nerve-wracking because this is the first time I've used the Zoom recorder, which is what we use for in-person, without Father Michael. So anytime I've used a Zoom recorder with him, he's been the one operating it and checking the levels and doing all the things. And I'm kind of scared. So listeners, I'm sorry if this doesn't work right. That's that. But hopefully it's going to be okay. Whenever I'm with Rachel, I feel like everything's going to be okay. So,
no, but we have some good saints interceding.
That's true. We also have Rachel here. So, so Rachel and I tried recording. Father Michael's not here. If you haven't figured that out yet, I'm very sorry to all of you because I know you love him. I love him too. Rachel loves him too, but he is not here. But we tried recording this episode a couple of months ago.
While Father was on pilgrimage in the Holy Land.
Yes. Not with either of us. Pretty salty about that.
Yeah, we were not cool enough to get invited on that pilgrimage, which is
probably true.
A little sad.
I know.
That's okay.
I think we're cool.
Yeah, we are.
Other people think we're cool.
Other people think you are very cool.
I know. Isn't that weird? I don't think I'm cool. But other people do think I'm cool. And I'm not really sure how that keeps happening when I feel like I'm very clear on this podcast that, I don't know, all of the awkwardness comes out and all of the uncoolness and all of the, I don't understand how it's happening, but that's
because
okay.
You're you, and therefore people appreciate it. I think that's what it is.
That's probably true. People appreciate seeing authenticity, and that I am. But anyways, we tried recording this a couple of months ago, and then we had technical difficulties, which was a bummer because I thought it was a great episode. I now don't really remember much of what we talked about. So we're not like repeating that episode. We're just kind of doing a new episode. But I'm glad to have you here anyways.
Well, I am honored to be here.
I have with me Rachel Schmitt, formerly Rachel Sweeney. Everyone has heard her name before because Father Michael and I have both talked about her multiple times. And the reason Rachel is here with me in person is because, can I share this, Rachel?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Glad we had this talk. Rachel's here with me in person is because Rachel's wonderful, and she also is an accountant. I pronounced my T's. I enunciated my T's there. I was told the other day that I say accountant the same way that I say important, and so they were getting a good, Sister Nufrey was getting a good laugh out of that. But anyways, Andrew Whaley would appreciate it as well. So Rachel's an accountant, and Mother Gabriella and I kind of take care of like the bookkeeping, accounting stuff at the monastery. And we've just like, we're kind of at the point where we're doing things that we know aren't efficient and are like double the work in places. Like we're entering the same data twice in 2 different places kind of thing, as opposed to figuring out a better system. And it's one of those things where like, if we just stopped and like figured out the more efficient way to do it, then we would save so much time in the long run. But we feel so overwhelmed by like the amount of work that we don't ever take the time to just stop and figure out the more important, like the more efficient way. And thus we're just always spending more time on it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. You mean it's like life?
yes, I mean, it's like life. Yeah. And so finally, at some point, Rachel and I were talking about accounting. And I was like, I think Mother Gabriella has a question for you about QuickBooks. And Rachel was like, anytime, just always. I'm very happy to. And I was like, at some point, I was just like, would you want to come for several days and just like look at how we're doing things and streamline it and kind of be like our efficiency manager or something? I don't even know what words I used, but you were just like, yeah, absolutely. So Rachel came out with her 5-month-old baby, which is real impressive. Drove here from Indianapolis. The baby is asleep on Rachel as we record, which is a great gift because she was not asleep 5 minutes before recording. So
Mother Natalia said some prayers and her eyes closed, and
Amen.
Clearly I need to get Mother Natalia to pray her to sleep every night. That was the most peaceful bedtime we've had.
Oh, it's pretty fantastic. I think it's the little Michelin Man costume she's in. She's in this sleeper and she's just this like puffy little marshmallow. I don't understand how babies don't get overheated do you know what I mean? Like if you tried to sleep in that, can you imagine?
I wouldn't make it like more than 20 minutes, I think.
I know.
Yeah. She has no concept of being overheated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So anyways, I'm excited that you're here. Happy to be with you. So that's the reason Rachel is here and we're able to record in person. The reason I asked Rachel to come on the podcast is because I had a Come to Jesus talk with Rachel several months ago. The Come to Jesus talk was about myself, not her. And in which I basically was like, Rachel, because here's the thing. Rachel Schmitt, everyone needs a Rachel Schmitt in their lives. I used to say everyone needs a Rachel Sweeney in their lives, but now it's Rachel Schmitt. But I think I'm getting used to it. And which I know we've talked about this before, Rachel, and you've like explained that Paul is that person for you. So I'm like, even Rachel Schmitt needs a Rachel Schmitt in her life. It's just Paul Schmitt. So anyways, whenever we have like a board meeting for Fotina, Rachel's the secretary for Fotina. And so whenever we have a board meeting, I go in and I'm just like super stressed. And I'm like, I probably have messed everything up and there are 1,000 things I should have done and everything is wrong. And then I log into Zoom and then I see Rachel's face and Rachel just says like 2 words, like, hello, mother. And everything is okay. And just like my anxiety levels go down. Everything is just so several months ago, I'm getting back to the Come to Jesus talk. Several months ago, I had this like crisis in my life. Crisis is too strong of a word, but I was like, you know who can help with this? Rachel can help with this. And so I called Rachel, who I don't even really know that well at that point. And we had a meeting and I was just like, Rachel, here's the thing. I'm overwhelmed by all of these things that I'm doing in life and I just can't do the things, but I don't know how to not do the things and so on and so forth. And Rachel was just like, yeah, you don't need to be doing any of these things. Like you need to be being a nun. And like, that means that you don't have to be the one who pays the credit card bill for Fotina. You don't have to be the one who like sends out the things to your patrons. telling them about like someone else can send out the stickers, like things like that. And to the extent, but Rachel also knows that Mother Natalia is very bad at saying no. And that's just true. And so Rachel has like really followed through with this in the sense of when we're at a board meeting, if something comes up and, Rachel's like, well, who can do this? And if it's silent for too long, I start to get antsy. And then as I open my mouth, Rachel says, not you, Mother Natalia, in the sweetest, most beautiful way.
Well, I think it's the beauty of being similar individuals in different vocations and different states of life. That gives me the freedom, but also helps me to see that moment when I can see it in your eyes on Zoom of like, I must volunteer. And it's like, no, actually, you must not volunteer.
Yeah. And which so that's why I wanted Rachel to come on, because at some point as we were talking, this conversation, I think might have been with Father Michael, I don't remember, but you said like, you guys should have a podcast on helping people with like when to say no. And I was like, you should be on that podcast. Because I think you do this really beautifully, when, and maybe you do this beautifully because like maybe for many years you didn't and you just learned your lesson. I don't know. But, I know that now, like I've seen you say no to things and to do that in ways that are like not rejection and not unkind, but it's just like a good boundary. And I've seen you say no. I've also seen you say not yet or not right now. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is that even when we need to say no, we don't always need to say no forever to something, like when we asked you to do some operation stuff for Fotina, you were like, you can ask me again in a year. Like you were preparing to get married at the time. And you're like, I need to learn to be like, I need to be in marriage for a second before I can take something else on and make sure that my husband is okay with this and all of that, which I think is good and prudent. And I probably wouldn't have done that if I were you. Maybe at this point in my life now I would, but, because here's the thing. And this is something that I want people to keep in mind throughout the podcast is like different personalities and different temperaments need to look out for this in different ways. Like I had a very honest conversation with Father Michael at some point, which I'll make sure he's okay with me sharing. And if not, we'll edit it out, actually. But where I was just like, look, Father Michael, here's the thing. I've realized that you and I have the same problem. Father Michael and I are very different people with very different struggles. But we have the same problem, which is that we say yes to things that we shouldn't. And the outcome is different. I say yes to things that I shouldn't. And then I feel bad and I feel like I need to do it anyways because I'm too prideful to say, sorry, I couldn't do it. So instead I sacrifice sleep or exercise or eating or showering, I sacrifice all of these things that really I need to be attentive to in order to live my vocation well. And I sacrifice those things. And then oftentimes I'm eventually like bitter about it and resentful and whatever, when it's my fault that I said yes to begin with. Father Michael, the outcome is just that he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't do it. And so it's like, and like neither of those are okay. And so it's not like, I think the temptation is for people to look at the people like me and say like, oh, they're so good. They do it anyways. They, and it's like, actually like of the outcomes, Father Michael's is probably the healthier. But like the saying yes to things that we shouldn't is not good for either of us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't talk about prudence and generosity. Mm-hmm. And that's just what I keep thinking about is we can be overly generous and in that fail to cultivate the virtue. Right? We can say yes to too many things. We can think that we're doing the best thing because we do desire to help. We have the best of intentions. And yet it actually fails to cultivate virtue because we didn't use virtue in the decision. And I think it is so true that different temperaments, different personalities are going to struggle with that in different ways. Mm-hmm. There's those who are just going to struggle to say yes. They're almost miserly in their generosity. Mm-hmm. And so for them, it's actually the virtue is saying yes. It is being generous. And then for others who are maybe overly generous at time, the virtue is saying no appropriately or saying no to the right things.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, yeah, what you're saying there is really important about, like, for some people, the calling them out of themselves really might be that they need to be saying yes more. And I think that's a really good distinction, because something that I think is really, really significant to keep in mind in this entire discussion is that, like, we can't, we should be extremely hesitant to judge what other people are doing in this regard, because two different people could have all of the same externals, the same number of kids and the same job that they're working and the same whatever. But, like, if we don't know the interior and we don't know the motivations and all of that, then we can't actually know for sure whether or not they should be saying yes or no. There are indications of that. There's good fruits and bad fruits and things like that, you know. Like, if someone is saying yes to doing something and then they're doing it and they're super angry the whole time, then, like, maybe they shouldn't have said yes to that. Or maybe they should have said yes, but something else got messed up in the process. But so it's like, the thing that I think is really important that people remember is there needs to be a constant growth of self-awareness, of discerning anything, right? And in this context, in discerning when to say yes and when to say no, when to give generously and when to hold back, because sometimes the holding back is the more generous thing to do. Like you're saying, if it's not actually coming from a place of virtue. And where was I going with that? Oh, so the self-awareness is really important because, you know, I've used this example before on the podcast, but there have been times, there was a few years ago, one of the nuns was in a terrible mood. And so I, like, offered to make her tea or something like that, or offered to make her coffee, because apparently beverages are my love language. And I offered to make her tea, and from the outside, like, that's beautiful. That's a generous gift. But in hindsight, maybe even as I was making the tea, I don't remember, but I was like, I'm not making this tea because I want to, like, help her. I'm making this tea because I'm miserable working around this nun who's in a bad mood, and I want her to be in a better mood so that I'm in a more pleasant work environment. Now, again, like, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't have done it anyways when I realized that, you know. That just means that I pause and I say, Lord, please purify my motives, you know, and then still make her the tea, because it's just an objectively good thing to do. But we do have to be aware of those motives, because when we're saying yes to someone, is it because of pride? Is it because we just don't want to disappoint this person? That's, oh my gosh, that's been so much of my life with Father Michael, you know, which he knows and I know, and we've talked about it for years, where I'm just like, I can't say no to you. And or but even the motivations can only be a part of it, a part of the discernment. It can't be the whole thing. We also have to think, like, what is the sacrifice that we're making in order to say yes to this thing? Because, like I said, even if I had all of the right motivations and saying yes to the things that are making me sacrifice my hygiene and my sleep and my whatever, I don't understand how I even still have friends. I thought this a lot in college. Like, given the choice between taking a shower and having more time to sleep, I would always choose sleep, and I don't understand how I maintain friendships. And so I probably just constantly say, I do shower, everybody. Anyways, I don't know how I got on that. Rachel, cut me off. Just say something here. Okay. That's great.
But you must shower, because Miriam clearly has no problem snuggling you.
That's true.
If you didn't shower,
and the baby would have no charity. So
I think there would come a point in time where the baby would reject the smells.
No, that's true.
So you're safe.
I did shower.
Granted, she only takes a bath once a week, so she's not a great standard of hygiene, everyone.
Miriam is the baby, if anyone missed that. No, but my point is, like, even if the yes is coming from good motivation, we also have to be thinking about the sacrifices that come with the yes. And just because they're sacrifices does not mean, because there's always a sacrifice, right? There's opportunity cost. This is a thing in economics. But just because there are sacrifices doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, because sometimes God is asking us to make that sacrifice. But that's just something that has to be discerned. I just read I thought this was very good. I just read as the vocation directress, I'm just, like, doing some extra reading and stuff, and with Mother Gabriela, the formation directress. But there's this article by Father, I think he's a priest, Peter Ryan, who's a professor of moral theology at Mount St. Mary's. And the article is called How to Discern the Elements of Your Personal Vocation. I highly encourage people. I'm a little more than halfway through it, but it's only like 12 pages or something. And it's a really, really good article that's talking about, just that, like, within your vocation, how do you discern the little things? And this great quote, he says, for example, a married person who takes up a hobby is not obliged to do it for the sake of the marriage. But a married person should not choose a hobby that prevents him or her from meeting marital responsibilities. And then he talks about how the commitment that priests and religious make is different from that of married persons, in as much as everything that religious and celibate priests do should be coordinated with their religious commitment, but subordinated to it. Everything they do, including their vacations and hobbies, listen to that, priests and religious, you listen to this. Everything they do, including their vacations and hobbies, should be done for the sake of helping people find salvation. I would put a nuance there that actually everything that we do, including our vacations and hobbies, should be done for the sake of our salvation, and then as a result, the salvation of those around us. But, like, our vocations are primarily for our own salvation. I am called to monastic life because I need this life for my salvation. It's the life I feel the Lord has asked me to live for my salvation. And through that, of course, he wants to work the salvation of many others. But anyways, I really liked the line particularly about the hobby. Like, a married person should not choose a hobby that prevents him or her from meeting marital responsibilities. Like, you should not, and this is exactly why you said you needed to hold off on doing things for Fotina, because you're like, I need to make sure that I'm being a good spouse and make sure that my husband is okay with these things and all of that. Because that obviously takes higher priority, as much as I would like to just, like Gabriella said earlier today, that she wishes she could just keep Rachel Schmitt in her pocket. That wasn't in front of you. So, Rachel's making the awe face right now. So anyways, what do you have to say about that?
I think it's so wise as a reminder of we can't judge anybody else's intentions. We don't know. And even if we did know their intentions, we don't know the full circumstances of their life. I think in marriage, we see this a lot around natural family planning, and just the exact same comment can be great reason for one couple and not great reason for another. And like you don't know. You don't know unless you are in that marriage. And I think in the same way, like, we are all asked to sacrifice, but not to such an extent that we sacrifice that which we are called to primarily. And I think that's the thing that I know when we had the conversation a few months ago, Mother Natalia, like, that was the thing that for me was so clear, was you said, like, this is beginning to impose upon my monasticism. And I was like, oh, that is not okay.
Yeah.
Like, nothing should get to impose upon your monasticism. That is the greatest gift you could give the world and the rest of us. So why on earth would we think we can impose upon that?
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing too is, at least I know in my own life, there are times I struggle to say no or to allow someone else to do something, even though I know it's the right decision. And in that, when I take it on when I shouldn't, what I forget is that I'm also robbing the person who ought to be doing it.
Oh, that's so good.
Of whether it's for them the sacrifice that's actually harder and is more purifying, or maybe it's life-giving. Maybe it allows them to use their gifts and talents in a way that brings them true delight and joy and peace. Whereas for me, it would have maybe been slight bit of resentment or some frustration, or just like, okay, I've got to get through it. And again, we don't always know what those are going to be. Like, we don't have the perfect vision to look at it and say, I need to say no to this because we need to ask so-and-so to do it. I think it's a lot more of trusting that if we say no to something we should have said yes to, the Lord can work with that. And if we say yes to something we should have said no to, he can work with that. But hopefully we're spending enough time with him that in the moments we're asked, we have a good sense of, is this something I should say yes to, or is this not?
Yeah, which is a really good point, because I think that in those moments we make the wrong decision, quote unquote wrong decision. We say no when we should have said yes, or vice versa. I think that calls us to a further discernment, right? Because in that moment, we then have to like pray about, and again, like really try to be honest with ourselves in prayer. We never want to try to be honest with ourselves outside of prayer. That's a weird thing to say. What I mean is, like, without calling Jesus into the honesty with ourselves, then we can start to just like despair, basically. But in prayer, be honest with yourself, and open it to the Lord of, what do I do with this now? Like, is this a moment in which you're saying to me, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and now you can't do this other thing that you wanted to do and that I was asking you to do, because you need to focus on this and you need to just follow through with your yes or your no, and then let the Lord work in it and bear fruit from it. Or, Lord, are you asking me to have the humility to tell this person I made the wrong choice, and I need to go back on that, and I'm sorry that it causes an inconvenience to you, and I wish I had discerned this better from the beginning, but this is what it is, like, so that's just, a moment in which we have to have a further discernment, because it's not always a clear thing to do even then, because I think sometimes he is asking us, like, I think he calls us to either of those things, at different times. And
I think sometimes even within the same, I don't want to call it faulty decision, but inaccurate decision, I can look at times in my life where I made the quote unquote wrong decision, or I can look back and realize there wasn't proper discernment there. And so it maybe was an incorrect decision. And there was an element of, I need to do this for a while. I need to sit in it for a while and let my no mean no and my yes mean yes. And that has certain sacrifices and consequences. And then there was also a time where it was like, okay, and now is the time where it makes sense to step away from this in whatever form.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. So yeah, I guess there's three options. Like either the Lord is saying like, no, you need to just stick this out, or he's saying you need to have the humility to say you did the wrong thing. Or he's saying like, stick it out for now. And then, which is, there's probably something there too of, again, with the different temperaments, probably I should be open to go back to the example of Father Michael and me, like, when I've said yes and I shouldn't have, I should probably tend more towards going to the person and saying, I shouldn't have said yes. Because my prideful natural tendency is to just do the thing anyways. And Father Michael should probably tend more towards like, well, I said yes, so I'm going to just do it, because his tendency is to do the opposite. So there's probably also just it's the question of, how is the Lord asking us to love in particular? And how is the Lord asking us in particular to sacrifice, to give of ourselves, so on and so forth. Which I think that's actually like the last main point that I wanted to make, this question of how is the Lord asking me to give of myself? And I was thinking of it when you were talking, Rachel, about how like it was not okay that these things were starting to impose upon my monasticism, because that needs to be my primary focus, which of course you're right. And I think all of our listeners would say like, yeah, of course that's the truth. Because the last like main point that I wanted to make, and then I'm happy to open this up to, if you want to share stories, I'm telling you this now in case you want to think of any, but like share stories of when you feel you've done this well, where you feel you haven't done it well, any kind of general tips you have for people about when to say yes, when to say no, etc. But before that, the point I wanted to make is we should actually always be saying yes. And I don't mean this in the sense of like, literally when someone asks you to do something, you should always say yes. So hear me out. But like, we should primarily always be giving a yes to something, to someone, to the Lord. And there are consequential no's that come from the yes. But the yes should always be the leading thing, never the no. So this is true of like, I need to be saying yes to my monastic vocation. And that means saying no to certain things. Sometimes that means saying yes to certain things, right? But primarily there's that yes to my monastic vocation. It's like, and this is true of everything in our relationship with the Lord. And it's true of like, when we look at things like canon law, or when we look at things like the commandments, or when we look at things, it's like, all of these things are really starting with a yes, or they should be. They are if they're rightly ordered. Even like things like chastity is primarily a yes. It's saying yes to the goodness and the fruitfulness of union with God, and yes to the goodness and fruitfulness of union with our spouse if we're married. And because of that, saying no to these other things. It's not like we're not doing the things because Jesus doesn't want us to have fun or something like that. It's because like, no, actually, this is a breach of my love for you to act in this way. And so out of my love for you, out of my yes to your love for me, I'm going to say no to these other things.
I think that's like the absolute best point to make. Because that yes to Christ, that yes to the Lord should govern everything. And as soon as we lose sight of it, right? Like as soon as we lose sight of that, the commandments become rules and laws and regulation instead of, no, I love you. Like, I love you, Lord. So of course I desire to keep the Sabbath holy. Of course I desire
Miriam.
to be with you. Yeah, Miriam agrees too.
Oh, that was such a cute little, it was just like a little sleep whimper.
Yeah, we're working on sleep right now. So every other parent of an infant will understand. But I think it's right because I think so often we use the word discern in the Catholic world in this, like, everything's a discernment. And it's like, yes and no. But if we're rooted first and foremost in that yes, that overarching yes to Christ, to being generous of our lives to him, to being faithful to him, the rest of the yeses and nos flow much more easily. And I think that's right. Like, as much as it's hard to say no or to pass things off with Fotina, it's easier. It's made easier knowing that you're doing it out of your first and foremost yes to your bridegroom. Yeah, I mean, when you guys initially asked me to help with some of the operation things, and I was like, I wanted to say yes right then, but I could also look at my life and say, my first and foremost yes right now needs to be to the man I'm marrying and to my vocation there. Not because Fotina isn't good. It is very good. But the greater good for my soul is my marriage. And I think that's probably like the piece that is such a good comment of like the no's come first from the yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and again, ideally, like that's how everything in our life should be driven, is that it's driven by always a yes, and then the no's just have to follow from that. That's not even just those big decisions. It's the daily life things. I did think of one other point that I wanted to make. So part of this, and I'm growing in this for sure. Part of this, I think, is that as we learn to have confidence in this, like when we actually feel we're doing what the Lord wants, then we can have a certain confidence, and then we don't even have to we don't have to over-explain, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. Because we get to this point where, someone says like, hey, can you, I'll use an example. I'll use a very real example in my life. I might have a spiritual directee who reaches out and says, can you meet with me for spiritual direction this week? Like, I really need to talk. And it might be that I'm just like completely swamped. And so I'm not available to meet with one of my spiritual children. And the temptation is to say, I'm really sorry, I can't. I have this and this and this and this and this, so that they really understand that like I'm just swamped and I have to say no. And I think that like that is typically not coming from a good place. Like there's a goodness in there of, I want my spiritual child to know that I love them. I want my spiritual child to know that like I really want to be there for them, and I'm not rejecting them, and they're worth making time for. But I literally just don't have the time to make. And so I think that what makes a lot more sense, and like depending on the degree of relationship that we have with someone, we might give more or less explanation. So I think what's better for me to do in that particular situation is to say to one of my spiritual children, and I've really meant this when I have said this to them, like, oh, I really wish that I could, like, it breaks my heart to say no, but I really can't make the time this week. How about next Tuesday at 3 p.m., you know, and to express that, like, I love you, I want the time with you, I don't want to say no, without having to give this whole laundry list of the reasons I'm saying no. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I articulated that well, but.
Yeah, I think there's a very fine line between excuses and transparency. And I think that's the struggle. I will say to everybody out there who's a listener, having been here for a day now, Mother Natalia has no time. She creates time. I'm not really sure how, to be honest. But yeah, like, she creates time.
We're eating lunch and I'm like entering my credit card reconciliation.
Yeah, she creates time for all of those that she loves and all of those that ask her of her anything. And it's not just her, it's all of the mothers here. It is the reality of monasticism. It's the reality of being poured out generously. But never take it personally because Mother Natalia has no time, as speaking as a third party.
Yeah.
But I think it is Father Michael, we ragged on him a bit, but in a good way, this is one of those things I know he said to me, like, he really admires and loves and is really grateful to have had modeled to him, which is that he's like, yeah, Chapieux never seemed to need to think about a decision or discern something. He spent so much time with the Lord and had such intimacy that he knew right away. And he had such confidence in the Lord and in his goodness that even if it maybe wasn't perfect, he'd still work with it. And I think that's, again, such a good model of knowing it comes first from that intimacy with the Lord. And so if you have the intimacy with the Lord and you have discerned it well, you may not have to give transparency.
Yeah, and I think that that actually reminds me a lot of something I read by St. Alphonsus Liguori. Is he talks about this concept of really like uniting our will with the will of the Father. Like basically spending so much time in prayer, building the relationship with the Father enough that, like, when the time comes to make a decision, you don't have to seek out what the will of the Father is because it's so united to your own at this point. You know, like, ideally, like, that's the point that we can get to. And I agree with Father Michael. Like, I think Archbishop Chapieux is there, was there, has been there for a long time. Like, I really admire him. Because it's, you know, I think it's similar to, like, if my parents are going out, my parents have been married for 32 years. And if one of them is going out to pick something up from a restaurant, like, they don't have to ask the other, what do you want me to bring home for you? Like, they know what their spouse wants. They've lived with them for long enough. And I think that's the place that we get to with this. So I think I'm glad you make that point because, like, when I say that we need to discern these things and whether to say yes or no and all of that, like, I don't even mean, you know, someone comes to you and says, hey, can you watch my kids on Thursday? And you're like, let me pray about it and I'll get back to you. You know, it's like, it's oftentimes just a very momentary thing. Is there a check in your spirit? And do you feel a hesitancy there? And if so, very quickly, like, where is the hesitancy coming from? And again, that only works if, like, you're spending a lot of time in prayer and you're putting in the effort to unite your will to the Father's, to make those momentary decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think to that of those checks and those momentary decisions, I think one of the things in my life that's been really edifying in this are those momentary decisions that happen again and again and again. The ones that kind of happen on repeat. So a good example, because we have a very present infant, is that my husband, Paul, we were kind of struggling to figure out sleep and schedules and all of that. And so finally he was like, oh, I'll just get up with her when she gets up in the morning. And, once she's eaten, like, I can take care of her for a few hours. You can get a nap. And there was this check in my spirit that rebelled. But after a few days of me kind of struggling through it all, it was like, well, this isn't sustainable for our family. Like, I'm not okay. We're not thriving. This isn't a good solution. And that check in my spirit was the desire to, like, it was pride, right? It was a desire to be good enough, to be competent enough as a mom, all of those temptations to pride. And the beautiful thing I started to see once I said yes to it and said, okay, yes, like, I'll nurse her and then you can have her and I'll sleep for a couple more hours and then we'll start the day, is that they have this really beautiful time together in the morning. First thing, when Miriam is at her happiest, her most enjoyable, just like she's the best version of herself for those couple of hours.
At Matins this morning, she was just like so smiley, living
her best life, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Leaning into me for kisses, like just,
Yes. And so he gets this beautiful time with her and he appreciates it. He rejoices in it. He delights in it. I didn't delight in that time. That time was full of exhaustion and resentment and frustration of, now I'm going to be exhausted. Now what next? What next? What next? And I think that's the beauty of those decisions that happen time and time again around the same thing. Is I made the wrong decision a few times. And then I got the opportunity to make the right decision. And then to see the difference in the fruits. Which I think that then teaches us a lot about what do those checks in our spirit mean? How do I discern that? And what am I looking for? What can I then look at and see as good fruits or poor fruits?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And it's, I think that gives kind of both of the examples I was looking for of when I said, can you give me an example of when you've done it well and when you've done it not as well? And I think that's an example of both. So that's great. Thank you. And then, I don't know, do you have any last thoughts, any last tips for people as they're trying to decide whether to say yes or no to things? And I don't know, just any last tips, I guess.
I think the last thing I would just say too is confession. Like if this is something that's really hard and you're not certain as a listener, if you're being called to be more generous, or maybe if you're actually called to be more prudent in your generosity, confession's a really beautiful space to acknowledge that. And I think to be honest with yourself, to be honest with the Lord, and then to be healed.
Whoa, did you hear that thunder?
That was a big thunderclap.
I think Jesus just gave you a mic drop. I hope our listeners heard that. I could hear it in the headphones, so I think they probably could.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, just because confession is ultimately about healing. Healing us back into full communion with the rest of the body of Christ. And so even to then, it heals whatever ramifications might be there from the failure that we can't see.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Which I'm glad you ended on that note, because I am a little bit worried that I've come across so harshly that it's both that note and what you said earlier of like, if we make the wrong decision, like the Lord can still work through that. So like, I'm glad you make both of those notes. You know, it's like, I'm not trying to say that maybe I'm just coming from my own insecurities of like, I do this wrong all the time. But yeah, just knowing that like, it's not the be all end all, and God uses all for good for those who love him, and so on and so forth, you know? So all of that. So that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you. Anything else?
No, except that you can't do it all wrong all the time, because, I mean, you do a lot of good. I'd say primarily all good. So I think we're okay.
Thanks, Rachel. Everyone needs a Rachel Schmitt. Even Rachel Schmitt needs a Rachel Schmitt. So that's the moral of this story. Okay, so we can, after the spiel and the shout outs, we'll go ahead and give prayer intentions. So you can be thinking of yours, Rachel, if you don't have it already. Let's see, the spiel. So we are on all of the social media things. Twitter is only Father Michael, not the podcast. So that's at Padre Michael O. But the podcast is on Instagram and Facebook, and we're on Goodreads. YouTube, audio only. And we are on Patreon, and those who support us on Patreon, that goes towards our nonprofit Fotina, which supports this podcast, but it also we have some ministry that goes towards the poor. Father Michael's helping someone out right now who's having trouble storing their things while they're living on the street, and some other things like that. So that's a great gift for us to be able to give to people, and we thank you for your generosity. And we also use some of that money to support other Christian ministries that are trying to evangelize in ways similar to us. And you can email us, whatgodisnotpodcast@gmail.com. You can check out our website, whatgodisnot.com. And our nonprofit's website is fotina.org. That's PHOTINA.org. And I think that's it. Back to the Patreon page. Thank you again for those of you who support us. I want to give a little bit of a shout out / thank you to 5 of you. We're still making our way through the backlog, but thank you to JDG from Colorado, Jen R from California, Oscar L from Canada. Oscar's great. I like Oscar. Eric D from Massachusetts. The MA is always hard for me. Okay. And then Marsha M, who I love very dearly, from Ohio. So I love all of you, but some of you I know personally and love very particularly, and there you go. So thank you all for your support. Okay, great. I didn't spend any time thinking of my prayer request. So I will ask for prayers. Let's see. When is this coming out? This is coming out September 20th. We have our community retreat in a couple of weeks in early October. So we have an annual retreat. So if you could pray for our community on our retreat, I'm real excited about it this year. And I'm always kind of excited about it, but I'm like super excited about it this year. And yeah, so you can pray for us and for the fruitfulness of that and whatever healing the Lord wants to do in us individually, as a community, etc. Rachel, prayer intention?
Yeah, this one will have already passed, but the Lord is good in time and eternity and applies all prayers that's needed. But my mom is a dear fan of the podcast. I think it might have been one of her top 10 days of her life when she got to meet Mother Natalia in Colorado.
Oh, when we went rock climbing? That was so great.
It was pretty awesome for her. But she unfortunately recently broke her leg and is recovering.
Mountain biking.
Yes, mountain biking. She is recovering, and it is quite the sacrifice for my mom to be laid up with a broken limb. In all the ways that means, both in terms of work, in terms of recreation, in terms of taking care of home life. And so just prayers for her as she recovers, and for her as she suffers the sufferings that come with it. And then also prayers for my dad as he does more to help take care of her. And both of them kind of have to shift their roles.
Do you want to share their names? Or no?
Yes. So Eric and Yana Sweeney.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Awesome. Well then, it's so good to be with you, Rachel. For recording, but also just in general, I love being with you. And I had a lot of fun rock climbing with you and your mom and Maddie and all that. So it's great. Okay, let's close in prayer. I can't give you all a blessing like Father Michael can, but I will send my monastic blessing, which is a thing, but it's not the same thing. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time with Rachel. Thank you for this podcast and for this ministry and the joy and the life-giving nature that it has within my vocation. Thank you for giving myself and Father Michael the courage and the desire to say yes to this. And thank you for the great confidence that you've given me that this is your will. Thank you for all of those in our lives who are the Rachel Schmitts, those who help us to keep our eyes and our hearts focused on your Son, our bridegroom, and the upbuilding of his kingdom. Thank you for our listeners and the fruits that you've borne in their lives through the time that we spend giving this yes to you. I ask that you grant Rachel and myself and all of our listeners the grace to discern well, to let their yes be yes and their no mean no, to sacrifice what you are calling them to sacrifice, and to stay focused on their primary vocations, to let any no come forth only from a yes. I ask also that you grant your blessings upon my community in our time of retreat, and upon Yana and Eric as Yana is healing. And I ask also that you bless the intentions, the good intentions of all of our listeners. I ask all of this through the prayers of Saint Rachel, Blessed Miriam, Saint Michael, Saint Nathaniel, Blessed Pier Giorgio, the Most Holy Theotokos, and all the saints. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us. Amen. Amen.